Hello, so this is intermediate level lesson 5. So our agenda for today, we're going to be identifying triads, triad inversions, scale degrees, and then we'll give you some vocabulary to work on. Okay, so introduction to triads. A triad is a chord that contains 3 notes, and triads are something that you'll see a lot in your music, especially if you play piano. Okay, so major triads are made up of the first, third, and fifth notes of the major scale of the lowest note. And the name of the triad is the lowest note of the triad. So for example, for D major, you start on D, and then you put the third note of that scale, so D, E, F sharp, and then the fifth note, D, E, F sharp, G, A. And that makes the D major triad. And to change a major triad into a minor triad, all you have to do is lower the middle note by a half step. And minor triads have the same key signature as the minor key of the bottom note. And we already learned how to find those key signatures in the first few lessons, so we're good on that. Okay, so now on the types of triads. Triads can be either harmonic or melodic, just like intervals. And harmonic triads can also be referred to as blocked chords here. And melodic triads can be referred to as broken chords. As you can kind of see visually, the melodic triad is kind of broken up into the 3 notes. Below are some examples, is the C minor broken triad and the C minor block triad, or the C minor melodic triad and the C minor harmonic triad. So identification practice, I'll give you guys a few minutes to identify the following triads by letter name, quality, and type. So yeah, feel free to pause the video right now, and then I'll go over the answers. Okay, so the first triad is C major. We're starting on C, and then we have E and G. The second one is F major. We're starting, it might be kind of difficult, but if you count down from this C, you go to A and then F. And the bottom note is F, so we have F major. And then the last one is G major, because we start on G and we go to B and D. And these are all harmonic triads because they're played at the same time. Okay. So now we're going to identify the box notes by letter name, quality, and type. So before we go on, just want to remind you guys that how to tell between major and minor is that if you don't have these like scales memorized and you don't know, like I know F sharp is in D major and F minor is in, and F natural is in D minor. Another way you can tell if a chord is major or minor is to look at the intervals between the 3 notes. So in a major chord, the interval between the bottom note and the middle note will be a major third. And then the interval between the middle note and the top note will be a minor third. So for this, in this case, it's F sharp and A. And if you do the counting, you'll find out that it's a minor third. And if you do need to review your intervals, feel free to go back to our earlier lesson. And for the minor chord, the bottom interval is a minor third. And the top interval is a major third. So really, all you have to do is look at the bottom 2 notes and think, oh, what interval are they? And then if you see that it's a minor third, you know that the key is minor. So with that in mind, let's go on to this practice. So this is a problem really similar to what you might see on a music theory exam. So identify the box notes by letter name, quality, and type, and then pause the video if you need. So the answer is a broken E minor. So this might be kind of hard, but if we can read bass clef, we can figure out that this note is E, this note is G, and this note is B. So if you are familiar with your scales, you can tell right off the bat that this is an E minor chord. And if not, you can assess the interval between the bottom 2 notes, E and G, and then you'll find that it's a major third. It's kind confusing because if you get a major third interval from the bottom two notes, that means the whole chord itself is minor. So they're kind of opposites. That's just something you'll have to remember. But because the interval of the bottom two notes is major, the answer is going to be E minor. And lastly, we know that it's broken because the three notes of the chord are not played at the same time. Okay, so that was a bit about major and minor. Obviously, in this 30-minute session, we're not going to have so much practice that you might be like completely sure about, how to differentiate between major and minor. So I recommend that you find some more practice online, and you can also email us directly because we have made our own worksheets with practice on this. So if you need extra practice, feel free to email our email. Okay, so we're going to go on to the two other types of triads. So besides major and minor, we also have augmented and diminished triads. And if you remember our lesson on intervals, this is kind of the same idea. So an augmented triad is a major triad with a raised fifth. The intervals between all the notes are major thirds. So remember, in a major scale, the interval between these two notes, between the bottom two notes would be major third, but the interval between the top two notes would be a minor third. In this case, both of the intervals are major thirds, and you can kind of check that real quick. So C to E is a major third, E to G sharp is a major third, so this chord must be augmented. Another way of thinking about it is that CEG is a C major chord, and then the G is raised a half step, so this must be a C augmented chord. One more way of looking at it, which isn't written here, is that you can look at this interval between C and G, which is the bottom note and the top note. And so you know from your interval knowledge that this is a fifth, but it's not a perfect fifth, it's an augmented fifth because the G sharp is raised. And if you have an augmented fifth, the chances are this triad is augmented. All right, now we're on to diminished triads. So a diminished triad is a minor triad with a lowered fifth. So it's like the opposite of an augmented triad, and the intervals between all the notes are minor thirds. So again, if we kind of draw these connections between the two notes, C sharp to E is a minor third. I'm gonna write it here. And E to G is also a minor third. So this must be a diminished triad. Second way of looking at it is that you know that C sharp, E, G sharp is a minor chord. So it would be a minor chord if we had this sharp here. But we know that a diminished triad is a minor triad with a lowered fifth. So if we lower this fifth here, that gives us the diminished triad. Lastly, the way I like to look at it is that you take the bottom note and the top note. You know it's a fifth. But if we look at C sharp and G, we know it has to be diminished. Because in the key of C sharp, the fifth note would have to be G sharp, and in this case, it's G natural. So we have that diminished fifth. Okay, so symbols. How do you write, like if you were to represent a triad, how would you write it out? It's basically the same as intervals. Remember with like major intervals, we use capital letters, minor with lower letters, and etc. So for triads, it's basically the same. I think we meant to say, okay, so here we wrote what you're supposed to do for major intervals and minor intervals and the other kinds of intervals. And then for the So for scales, you would write these on the bottom. And you can also, for augmented and diminished, you can also use a degree sign or a plus sign instead. So for example, if you wanted to write D major, we would write it like capital D. Oops. D minor would be all lowercase. For D diminished, you can either write D diminished. I would just write dim because the word is kind of long, or you can write D and then just a little circle there. And then for D augmented, we're going to go back to the uppercase. Or you can do D and then a plus sign. And this slash is just showing you the different ways you can do it. That's a terrible plus sign, but I hope you get the idea. Okay, so we're gonna do some identification practice. I think for right now, especially if you're just starting off with triads, the best way you can practice is to just figure out like the interval between the two notes. Or if you suspect that this is an augmented or diminished triad, you can look at the top note, bottom note, and see if that interval is diminished or augmented. But whatever method you want, I'll give you a few minutes. You can pause the video if you want, and then I'll go over the answer. Okay, so the answer is a C diminished triad. And the reason this is because if we draw the intervals to bottom to middle and middle to top, C to E flat is a minor third. And then E flat to G flat is also a minor third. So when we have two minor thirds, we know it must be diminished. And C to G flat also makes a diminished fifth. So we know that this must be diminished. Okay, now we have a melodic triad, and I'll give you guys a few minutes. Okay, so the answer to this one is an A major triad. So first of all, we know we're starting on A, and then A to C sharp is a major third. Wait a minute. And then C sharp to E is a minor third, because we know the third note of C sharp major would have to be E sharp, but because the top note is only an E, we know that it's a minor third. And when we have major third on the bottom and minor third on the top, we have an A major triad. Okay, another melodic triad. Feel free to pause the video and work on this. Okay, so for this one, the answer is D major, and it's almost identical to the process we used to figure out the A major one. So D to F sharp is a major third. I don't know why it's not letting me write. Okay, major third, and then F sharp to, F sharp to A is a minor third. And if you think that doing all this interval work is tedious, yeah, I kind of agree with you, but I think with time, you'll be able to recognize what a D major triad or E minor or whatever without having to work out each individual step. That just comes with time and familiarity with notes in general, so don't worry. Okay, next one. So the answer to this one is a G augmented triad. So if we work on the intervals between each note, we know that G to B is a major third, and B to D sharp is also a major third. And when we have two major thirds, that gives us an augmented triad. Alternatively, we can connect the bottom note and the top note, G and D sharp, and we know that gives us an augmented fifth. Therefore, this triad is augmented. Okay, I don't know how many more of these we have, but I think this is the last one. So this one, it kind of looks different from the other ones, and I think we're soon gonna find out why. So you know what? Give this a try if you want. It'll be a challenge. And then we're going to go to the next slide, next portion of our lesson. So this is actually an E flat major triad. I know that the chord itself starts on G, but if we think of it as a G triad, it doesn't make sense because all the notes have to be the first, third, and fifth note of the scale, and E flat would kind of be the sixth note of a G scale, and that doesn't make any sense. But if we write down what the notes are in this triad, we have G, B flat, and E flat, and then we rearrange it so that E flat is on the bottom. We actually do get a normal triad with E flat as the bottom note, G as the third note, and B flat as the top note. And that would give us an E major triad. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about next, which is triad inversions. So each triad can be written in 3 different inversions by writing the 3 notes of a triad in a different order. So as you know, each triad has 3 notes. And then either of these 3 notes can be written on the bottom, and it will still be the same exact triad. So we're going to start with root position, which is what we've been looking at. So a root position triad occurs when the note that names the triad is on the bottom. So like for example, C minor, the C is on the bottom. So root triad positions are also called 5/3 triads because the intervals from the bottom note to the other 2 notes are a fifth and a third. So an example is the C minor root position triad. If we're in C minor, we should put the C at the bottom because in root position, the note that names the triad is on the bottom here. Let me underline that part. Okay, now we're going to go to first inversion. So first inversion occurs when the third or middle note of the triad is the bottom note. And so for like our root position triad would be C, E flat, and G, but we moved the C to the top and then we erased the bottom C because, you know, we don't want to repeat the Cs. So it's still the same chord, but we just moved the C to the top. And then first inversions are also called 6/3 triads because the interval from the bottom note to the other 2 are a sixth, which is E flat to C, and a third. So an example is the C minor 6/3 triad. I think I already went over this, you know, with like maneuvering the C to the top. So if that's how you want to visualize a first inversion triad, do whatever helps you. Okay, and then second inversion is when we kind of move one more note to the top, and then the 5th note is at the bottom. Try to ignore that because that's going to make it kind of confusing. So the 5th note of the triad's on the bottom. So, you know, we originally started with C, E flat, and G for a C minor triad, right? We first move the C up here. That gives us our first inversion, and then we can erase this. But we want to invert it one more time. So we're going to move the E to the top too and erase that. And that gives us G on the bottom and C and E flat on the top. And if you're wondering why these exist, it's because, you know, to write interesting music, you obviously use chords most of the time, but you don't want to use the exact same chord with the same order of notes over and over again. And if you want to learn like voicing, it's also super important to know inversions. It's a big component of the AP music theory exam. So if you want to go that far, then this is definitely something that you should learn. Okay, and let's look at all 3 inversions next to each other. So just take a few minutes to look at this diagram if you want, to like soak it all in, and feel free to pause the video. So now we're going to do some identification practice. So we're not only going to identify the triad by letter name and quality, we're also going to find the inversion. And tips for identifying the inversion of the triad is first, look at all of the 3 notes that are presented before you and write them down. So in this example, hopefully you know how to read notes. It would be G, B, and D. And we look at these 3 notes, and now you're going to have to use, it might take a lot of practice to figure out which one of these notes is supposed to be the root, so the bottom note, the key that the triad is in. For this one, it's just going to tell you guys that it's G. And then once you know that, identify the quality of the triad. So we know it's major using, the exercise I did before. And then the inversion, we know the root is G and G is on the bottom. Like the note at the bottom is the root of the scale of the triad, sorry. So that means that we're in root position. So this would be a G major root position triad. And remember, root position is also written as 5-3. Okay, this one, let's do it together because, well, if you can pause the video now if you want, but I'm going to continue talking about how we can solve this. So let's write down all the notes that are presented before us in E, G, and C. So looking at this, we can kind of try different combinations of notes like G, C, E, G, E, C, but like eventually you're gonna find out that the right order of notes is C, E, and G. Because E is the 3rd note of C and G is the 5th note of C. So let's erase these things. So now we know that C is the root of this triad, and we can figure out that C, G is going to be a major triad. So if we know, if the root is now on the top, you can kind of visualize that it's just been moved there from the bottom. So this must be the first inversion. So that's a good way to, excuse me, that's a good way to remember the first inversion is that the root is going to be at the top. So this is a C major first inversion triad, also written as 6-3. Okay, this one. This one, I'll give you guys a few minutes. You can pause the video to work on your own. So the answer to this one is a D diminished root position triad. And if you notice, we're trying to write these answers in the correct format with like capitalization and everything. So if you want to practice that, good for you. So the reason this is D diminished is because, first of all, we write the notes down. When you're trying to figure out the inversion of a triad, I recommend ignoring any like accidentals or anything and just looking at the notes themselves and seeing is excuse me, is F the 3rd note of D, is A the 5th note of D? In this case they are, so we do know that D is the root note. So we do know that we now know it's in root position. But now we have to figure out what quality it is. Is it major, minor, diminished, or augmented? So, and now we can just kind of use the same activity we did before. We can look at the top and bottom note, D and A flat, and we know that this is a diminished 5th, therefore the chord has to be diminished. So it's D diminished root position. And for this one, feel free to pause the video and work on it as well. So the answer is D minor, 2nd inversion. So why is this in the 2nd inversion? First of all, let's write out the notes, A, D, F. And we'll soon figure out that the correct order is D, F, and A. So D is the root note, and the root note seems to be at the middle of the chord, which means it was already moved to the top from that first inversion, but then they had to do another inversion to get that middle note to the top. So a good way to remember the 2nd inversion is that the root note is going to be in the middle. And then we know that it's minor through our this is a minor 3rd, this is a major 3rd. So we know the quality of this chord is minor. Okay, so this is the next problem, and I'll give you guys a few minutes to work on it again by pausing the video. So the answer to this one is C sharp minor first inversion. So we're doing the same thing as before. We write down all the notes, E, G sharp, and C sharp. And ignoring the sharps and stuff, we can just look at the notes E, G, C. And then we soon figure out that the order has to be C, E, and G, since C and E are a third, and C and G are a third. So now let's add the sharps. So we do know that C sharp to G sharp is in fact a perfect fifth. So this chord isn't going to be diminished or augmented. So let's look at the intervals between the notes. C sharp to E is a minor third, and E to G sharp is a major third. And that pattern exists when the chord is minor. So we know that it's C sharp minor, and now let's find the inversion. So the root is C sharp, that we already know that, and the root is at the top, which means we're in the first inversion. Okay, and feel free to ask us for more practice on this. I think you can also just search up Triad Inversion practice online, and there's going to be a lot of resources. So yeah, we're going to go on to the last topic, which is scale degrees. So this is important if you want to ever write music or just understand more about what's going on in your pieces. So every scale has scale degrees based on the triads built on each note of the scale. And when building triads on scale notes, you should apply the key signature to each note of the triad. And when labeling scale degrees, we also use the uppercase / lowercase Roman numerals and the diminished / augmented symbols if necessary. And these Roman numerals are called figured-based symbols. So the example below is C major. If we ignore the top chords, we know that these bottom notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, are part of the C major scale. And if we build triads on each of these notes, remember triad is just third and fifth note of the bottom note grouped together, we can find out whether these triads are major or minor. So for the C triad, if you build upon it, it's obviously going to be major because the key is in C major. But for the note D, if we build a triad on this one, it's not going to be major. We can't write an F sharp here because there is no F sharp in the key of C major, which is the chord, which is the scale that we're working with. So this is going to have to be D minor. Same with E, but then when we get to F and G, the chords happen to be major, and I'll soon explain why. And then for A and B, for A it is minor, and then for B, if we look closely, it's actually diminished. It would have to be minor with an F sharp. So you know how we realized that in every scale, the first, fourth, and fifth chord are major and no others? That's because these scale degrees are called the primary triads, and they happen to be more important in music than the third, second, sixth, and seventh notes. So for example, if you're writing a song in C major, especially pop artists, they'll use a lot of the fourth and fifth chords over the seventh, second chords, stuff like that. Okay, so yeah, the other chords are all called secondary triads. And so the pattern is that all primary triads in major scales are major, and the secondary triads in major scales are minor or diminished. And for minor scales, it's basically the opposite, all primary triads in minor scales are minor, and you can look more into this on your own, and feel free to email us because we can always provide you further material. So each of these scale degrees have their own names. I would suggest you guys don't get scared or intimidated by these kind of fancy names. They're basically just naming which note of the scale it is. Like C is the first note, D is the second note, and so on. So the first note of the scale is called the tonic. The second is called supertonic, and as we go down is mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, and then the leading tone. The seventh note is called the leading tone because when you hear the seventh note of a scale, you always want to lead back to the tonic. Okay, so here's some scale degree practice, and in case you can't see the scale degrees, I think I moved my camera up. I'm not sure if the recording will do that. Let's go back to the last slide just to, you can take a picture of this or something to help you with this upcoming slide. So what is the subdominant of a C major scale? So if we look to this chart, subdominant means the fourth note. So breaking this down, question 1 is basically asking, what is the fourth note of a C major scale? And with some deliberate thinking, I'm sure we can figure out that it's F. Okay, slightly harder. F sharp is the leading tone of which major scale? So leading tone, if we look in our chart, it means seventh note. So what scale is F sharp seventh note of? Take a few seconds to think about it. So it is the leading tone of G major. All right, third question is what is the submediant of an F major scale? Looking at our chart again, submediant means sixth. So this question is asking what is the sixth note of an F major scale? We can start on F and just kind of imagine ourselves going up. So there's F, G, A, B flat, C, D. So the submediant of an F major scale is the note D. And the last question, it might be a bit harder than the other three. It's asking, what is the quality of the chord of the mediant in an A major scale? So remember, the quality of chords, it basically means if it's minor, major, or etc. And remember, the quality is determined by the capitalization of the Roman numerals. So for example, 1 is capitalized, means it's major. 2 is not capitalized, which means it's minor. So if we look at the mediant, we'll see that it's not capitalized either. And there's no diminished symbol next to it, which means that the quality of the mediant is minor. And here are the answers. Okay, so when we taught this class in late 2020, we would give homework each week to our students. And again, you can ask us for homework privately if you want extra practice. But this page is just kind of a condensed slide with a bunch of information about basically everything we've learned in class, except maybe the scale degrees. But feel free to take a picture of this slide to help you with any further practice you want to do. And here's some vocabulary that you might want to keep in mind and study. Here are all the scale degrees. Here are the inversions of triads. And if you want, you can also try to remember augmented, diminished, major, and minor. Those are the 4 qualities of scales. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them down in the comments below or email us at youngartistsms@gmail.com. I'll write that up here. Thank you for everyone that's found our lessons helpful. We will be starting to post the beginner lessons soon, which kind of covers level 1 and 2 of music theory. So if you've never taken a music theory course before, you can head over to the beginning course and you can start there. But yes, thank you for watching today's lesson. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And yeah, that's it. Bye.